Okay, hi everyone. So I'm Wojtek Kaliciński. I'm a developer advocate from Google. I work in London. It's nice to be here for the first time in Zagreb. I don't know if I can follow the previous act. I could talk about Zagreb and the food all day, but since this is an Android conference, I thought I'd do a presentation about Android, and since you're our developers, then Android development today, which is a different title than the one you have on the schedule, because when we were announcing or when we were sending our titles of sessions to conferences, Android N was not out yet, so we had to be a little tricky about that. This is going to be what's new in Android, and before we go through Android N developer preview, there's a couple of things I wanted to say about what we've been doing during the previous a year, let's say. And we've been focusing really the theme of last year at Google at developer relations, so that's what we do, was generally improving developer experience on Android. And a couple of things we did was improve our developer tools. That's the main thing right now, right? I hope you're all using Android Studio. Who isn't using Android Studio? Is anyone here on Eclipse still? Okay, that's very good. And when I was in Turin, there was like 10 people, and I told them, come to me, talk to me after. They didn't show up. But yeah, if there's anyone who's still on Eclipse and they have any problems moving to Android Studio, please do let me know after the session. I want to talk to you. But yeah, we just released Android Studio 2.0 like a couple of weeks ago. And even just a couple of days ago, we released Android Studio 2.1 into the stable channel. So, but I didn't update my slides on purpose. So Android Studio 2.0, which we originally started, testing with you guys in December, I think, or November even. This was a big new thing. So it introduces awesome features for developers like instant run. So you can just press the play button and see your changes in your app, reload in real time almost on the emulator. The emulator itself, it's brand new. It's really fast. Installation speeds are like 5-10 times faster than previously. And there's lots of cool new stuff in Android Studio 2.0 and 2.1, of course. So I really encourage you to try it. Going further, the theme for last year was also testing. So we've greatly improved our testing offering from Google. So we have this awesome Android testing support library. If you're not testing your apps yet, there's never a better day to start. So I encourage you to really go on our Android testing support library website, read all about our great UI testing framework, Espresso, and also we have some awesome samples for you to try out. If you've never done it, I really encourage you to try it. And the other thing, apart from writing your apps, when you've actually used the IDE, when you wrote your app, when you edit tests, and you're ready to publish, the other thing you need is a really great publishing platform. And of course, I hope you're all using Google Play. And Play has been quietly adding lots of new features. So you get lots of incremental updates in Play. I don't know if you're familiar with all of them. Let me just tell you about some of the things we added during the previous months. So if you're using, for example, if you're using ProgArt for your apps to shrink your code size and obfuscate your code, there's this new awesome thing where you can actually upload the mappings file into Play. And if you get crashes, if you get stack traces from people using your app and you want to debug it, it used to be really difficult. So you had to somehow deobfuscate it. Now if you upload the mappings file to Play Store, it'll automatically do that for you. So that's just one thing. Again, the theme here is improving developer experience. So it's helping you make better apps with small things like that. Also, there's lots of stuff like for marketing your app, for the people who do analysis of downloads and so on. So you can run campaigns from Play, add campaigns, so you can analyze where people actually find your app, where they go to your Play Store page and download the app. There's all kinds of cool stuff. I really encourage you to go through all the options in on the Play Store and the publishing console on the left. Go through all the menus. I'm sure you'll find something there that you haven't used before, just because we keep adding so much stuff there. And third thing is we know the samples and the documentation have historically not always been up to par with what you expect maybe. So we're really working on that. We're releasing a lot of new samples, a lot of new code for you to dig into, to look how things work, also to update the documentation site itself. So I know there's a lot of stuff that still can be done, but it's improving. But one of the things I want to highlight is something that developers, whenever I go to conferences, I ask developers, what is the one thing you would expect Google to do? And they always say, we need more guidance on how to build our apps in terms of how to architecture our code, how to structure our code. And I'm happy to say that we have released on GitHub a repository with several versions of an app. That's a very simple to-do app. Like you can add notes and see a list of notes. It's kind of simple. It's medium. I would say it's a medium complexity app. But what's the most important is in different branches you can actually see it re-implemented using various methods. And what's even more cool is that it's not Google who does that. It's actually my colleague is spearheading that project, but it's done with in collaboration with the community. So even here in the audience, there's some people who are contributing, who are actually speaking in the conference. So thanks very much. And new versions of the app are added all the time, so you can see how to implement the app using like MVP and data binding and RxJava. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you really to check it out and maybe contribute your own version. Who knows? Maybe it'll get into the official repo. We're also, of course, working on videos and articles. So we, as always, we post on our blog. We post videos on YouTube where you can learn all about the new APIs and technologies. But I want to highlight one new thing. We actually started several months ago. We started our own account on Medium. So if you're not following that, I encourage you to go on medium.com/Google Developers. Just remember the other channels. It's Android developers. On Medium, we just have a Google Developers account. And there's lots of cool articles being posted. Usually when we have videos, when you have tips, then you can read a longer form kind of blog post on Medium that goes more, does a more deep dive into the content we do. And one of the articles posted recently, well, a couple of months ago, is from SVP of Android, Hiroshi Lockheimer. So it discusses the new name of Android N, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, but we're going to talk about it a bit today. So the fourth thing is, of course, platform releases. So anything new that's coming, behavior changes, new APIs, and yeah, that's what I'm here really to talk about. And to get really your feedback about the new things that we're introducing. So you probably know we have this developer preview thing. We started last year with M. This year it's a little bit earlier in the year, so that's mostly because we really want to get feedback from you and have the time to incorporate it, fix any bugs, and we really want it to be a great release later this year. You can find the schedule of the developer preview releases, which you can install mostly on your Nexus phones. Now there's also one for Sony. And one for Android One phone. We're currently at somewhere in the middle of developer preview 2. Just don't try to figure out from the graph when the next one is happening. It's sometime in May. It's not up to scale. So, but anyway, there's still some time for you to go on our bug tracker, file bugs, help us make this the best release possible. And at some point, maybe in May, maybe in June, there will be a release with the final SDK, and probably at that point, you will be able to upload your apps to Play, targeting the new release before it's actually published to users. So you will have ample time to test your apps, make sure everything works correctly. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the behavior changes in a bit, because there's stuff you should do to make sure your app works correctly. But first, there's also some new cool user-facing features. I'll go through them quickly. There's too many to talk about in 45 minutes I have. But first of all, multi-window support. This is pretty big. I know it's various OEMs have been adding that to their devices. Now it's finally being added to the platform. So you will be able to do it on every Android device with N. And the API is pretty small. If you're writing your apps correctly, if you're using relative sizes, relative layouts, if you're making sure that your app works correctly in any screen orientation and so on, it should just work with multi-window. There's a way to disable multi-window for your apps. I encourage you to not do it. It's for special cases where your app cannot work in multi-window in any way. But yeah, it would be really nice if you just test your apps, try to run it side by side with another app and make sure that everything works. One thing that I want to highlight is the life cycle for your applications doesn't change in multi-window mode. So even if two apps can be seen on the screen at the same time, only one of them is in a resumed state. So for example, if you're doing video playback, and if you're stopping the video playback on pause, then you might want to check and change that to on stop. That's what we did in YouTube. These are the small kind of changes you need to be mindful about, and just be sure to test your apps. Another thing, we've completely revamped the notifications. That's mostly a cosmetical change. It's like there's this new layout. If you were using builders to build your notifications, then everything should work. But it's still nice to be aware of a couple of things. So, for example, now every notification at the top, if you can see, I don't know if you can see from the back rows, every notification includes on the top the name of your app. So if you were doing anything like, I don't accuse you of anything, but if you were like spamming your users with notifications, well, maybe now is the best time to stop doing that, because it will be very easy for the user now to identify your app, and they will know that your app is the spammy one. But anyway, there's a couple of more changes. So for example, if you're using quick actions, then the icons at the bottom are gone. This makes it a little more readable for users, but also lets you give the actions longer labels. So these are the things to watch out for. But also there's two new, absolutely new features for phones and tablets coming from Android Wear. So if you're developing for Android Wear, you might know that there was this option to group notifications. So for example, if you have like 10 emails, then that can be like that. These 10 notifications can be compacted into one, and then you can go into this group and see all the emails one by one. That's coming to bigger devices from Android Wear. The API is exactly the same. It's very simple. I encourage you to try it out. And also quick replies. So again, on Android Wear, if you got a text message, you could reply by voice immediately from the notification. And now it's coming to phones and tablets where you can just reply in line. Just the keyboard pops up. You don't have to open the app. You can just reply to a message quickly. And again, if you're using the notification builder, it's really easy to add to your apps. So I encourage you to do it. Going quickly through some of the other user-facing features. So now you can add quick setting styles. So that's the thing when you open the notification shade, you have all these little icons. So you as developers can now add your own. So these are usually just like quick toggles, like enable flashlight, disable flashlight, enable Wi-Fi, disable Wi-Fi. Again, the API has a very small surface. You just implement the service, override two methods, and you can have your own quick setting style. Next, display size adjustment. So previously on Android, for users, there was the option to make text bigger. So if they went into settings, display, they could change the text size. So for example, people who have poor eyesight could make the text bigger so they can read it more easily. For developers, we always encourage you to use the SP units for text, which were dynamically resizable according to that setting. Well, now it gets a little bit more interesting. Now the user has the option to actually zoom the whole interface, not just text. So if they need the icons to be bigger, you know, pretty much every aspect of the layout to be bigger or smaller, they can do that in a certain range. But what it means for you developers is, again, you have to remember to use relative dimensions for everything in your layouts. And what's even more, you need to test your layouts on really, really small screens. So the result of the user zooming the screen is similar as if you were running your app, for example, on a 320 dp device. So these phones are pretty rare. They used to be popular for like very cheap phones, very small phones, but you might not test your apps on them anymore. So now I encourage you to do that if even on the emulator. Next, multiple locales. So historically, you were only able to set one language for your phone, but for multilingual people, like I guess all of we here are, since I'm speaking English and we're all in Croatia, you can now set multiple locales for your phone. And for apps that have been expecting one language only, that can change things. Like for example, a search app, if I have two languages set, now could customize the results. And there's for me, for the two languages that I speak, and there's an API to read that. And I think there's I talked about it with one of the speakers yesterday. There's a session at this droidcon about localization for your apps. So I hope you'll be able to hear about it more. One thing that's useful sometimes is direct boot. So if you've ever had your phone reboot on you in your pocket, or if you like ran out of power and just started your phone, connected it to power but forgot to input your password after it boots, then you won't get any alarms, you won't get any messages, and so on. We're fixing that with direct boot. With direct boot, apps can actually run before the user inputs the password for the first time on the phone after it reboots. I'm not going to go into detail about that. Just yesterday, my blog post on Android developers on that topic came out, so please read it if you're interested. Especially if you're writing messaging apps or alarm clock apps, anything that needs to give the user timely notifications. And data saver, I'm going to cover that later. But the biggest changes, I guess, for both users and developers are, again, in the underlying system, more happening in the background, right? So there's these two projects that's been going on in Android since KitKat, or even before that. So that's Project Volta and Project Svelte. And let's start with Project Volta. It's all about making the battery better. So with each release, there's incremental changes to how Android manages the apps in the foreground, in the background, to better conserve battery. And you probably know, this is a refresher from last year, you probably know in Marshmallow we introduced this Doze mode. So how it works, if you don't remember, how it works is when the user, for example, leaves their tablet on a coffee table or in a drawer somewhere, then it doesn't make any sense for the tablet that is unused for days or hours or days to continually refresh data and connect to the internet and download and run all those apps. So what we did was introduce this concept where an unused device would just shut down access to apps, to like network, to holding wake locks, and only periodically, like once an hour, then once per 2 hours, then 4 hours, and so on, let them run in a short window of time. And that increased battery life for a device that sits on a coffee table a lot, like multiple times. But guess how much it increased the time for a phone that is used, that is constantly in your pocket, and so on? Anyone care to make a guess? Can I hear something here? No? Let me tell you, it was 0. Well, Doze mode would not kick in if you were holding your phone in the pocket because it was not stationary. So we needed to do something about that. And so Doze mode in N, we are extending it. So now there is this lighter version of Doze that kicks in whenever the screen is off and the phone is not charging, but it can still be moving. So whenever you have your phone in your pocket, when you put your phone on the desk for a while, whenever the screen goes off, after some time, we shut off access to network, and jobs and syncs are deferred. So your app, well, can run in certain circumstances, but it can access the internet, and that was really the main thing that was affecting your battery life. Of course, if you leave it stationary for a longer time, still the Doze mode from Marshmallow will kick in. And what can you do about it? Well, the best thing, again, is make sure you're ready, make sure you test your apps, but there's several things you can do if you need your app to run, if you need your app to have internet access. So the main thing is, please use GCM. There's a version of GCM messages that can actually wake up your phone from those. These are called high priority messages. If you're making a messaging app, if you have to make sure the user gets a notification even though the device is in Doze mode, this is pretty much your only option. Foreground services are, of course, exempt from those. So if you're listening to music, that probably would be a foreground service. It can still run, don't worry. And the last thing, and it's really the thing that you shouldn't use unless you have no other option, is whitelisting your app. So your app can be exempt from those if the user whitelists it. But watch out, please read the documentation. There's only several cases where you can do that, or your app will be removed from the Play Store. So please use it with caution. And moving on to Project Svelte, and this is a part of a bigger effort that we call system health. So it's pretty much everything that affects day-to-day use of the device by the user. So it's about speed, about performance, and in this case also about memory. So imagine a situation where, of course, you are using your phone. There's this top foreground app that the user cares the most about. You know, they're trying to fling through a list view. They're trying to read. They're trying to move across the app and on different screens. And then there's all these background services that are running for some reason, because we all know on Android there can be a lot happening in the background. But of course, the device has only a limited amount of RAM, and every process, every app takes up these precious resources. So what happens is the user has a really bad experience when they're trying to interact with the phone. And we identified the main reason that we can help with this new release. And the reason why there's so many background services, background apps running, turned out to be there's a lot of implicit broadcasts happening in the system. And if you're not familiar with the term, implicit broadcasts are broadcasts that are sent to pretty much all apps that are listening. These are not broadcasts that are targeted to a specific component, to a specific app, because that wouldn't be a problem. It would just be one app, right? These are broadcasts that are sent by the system, and every app can just register to listen for it. And in fact, there is one broadcast that we identified that is connectivity change that happens to happen a lot. If I move from this room to outside, I will probably switch hotspots. If I go out of the hotel and back, I will probably switch to 4G and Wi-Fi several times, because the network stack will keep bouncing from to find the best network. So there were a lot of these events, and it turns out a lot of apps were actually registering to listen for it in the manifest. So you can put a static broadcast receiver in your Android manifest, and every time I move, I move from a Wi-Fi to 4G and so on, every time my app will be woken up. And guess what happens when there's 10, 15 apps that listen for all of those events? They get woken up. Many times they don't have to do anything because there's no real work for them to do, but still the process has to be started up. And then, when all these processes are competing for memory, that's what we call memory thrashing. So the system tries to continually spin up new processes, runs out of RAM, and has to kill them in order to run all those new processes. And that's the main situation we're trying to fix. So in N, you won't be able to listen for the connectivity change broadcast anymore from your Android manifest, registered broadcast receivers. if your app is running, if you can register the broadcast receiver in code dynamically, you can still get those events. It's sometimes useful, but your app will not be woken up from the background when this broadcast happens again. The alternative is to use the job scheduler API that we introduced in Lollipop, I think. If you're worried about backwards compatibility, pretty much the same API is implemented in GCM Network Manager, which is available for all devices with Play services. And how it works, it's really simple. You have this system service that's the job scheduler, and you can pretty much just schedule jobs whenever you're on a certain network. So if you're listening for those events to, like, for example, synchronize data whenever you're on Wi-Fi, you can now do that by specifying constraints for the job scheduler. And whenever you are on the network that you specify, like for example, Wi-Fi, your app will be woken up, you will be able to do your synchronization, and everything should be fine. There's also more constraints that you can add. So for example, you can only specify that you only want to synchronize whenever the device is charging. So this is a really flexible API. This gives you a lot of flexibility and gives you a lot of benefits from using it and the user. There's also another very similar situation. So there's two more implicit broadcasts that are going away. Whenever a user took a picture with the camera, there was this new picture intent sent and a new video, and the situation was similar. So if a user is using the camera, right, if they're taking pictures, it's normally not just one. They're trying to make money, like they're trying to catch some kind of situation that's happening, right? If they take one photo and now suddenly this broadcast gets sent and all those cloud backup apps get woken up and so on, then it's making it really difficult for the user to actually take that second photo. So we're doing away with those two intents too. And again, the solution will be Job Scheduler, and hopefully in the future GCM Network Manager. And why I'm saying in the future, we actually extended the Job Scheduler API and N so that you're able to listen on content providers and run your jobs whenever a content provider changes. This is not in GCM Network Manager yet, but we're hoping to add it soon, so you can use it in previous Android versions too. And besides, there's lots of benefits to using Job Scheduler. We've improved it for N, so it's a little bit more intelligent. It tries to prioritize things that for your apps that run in the background, and also it tries to look at your RAM consumption and how many tasks it can run at the same time. This is one thing that I really love. You might not love it at first. So passing file URIs is now deprecated between apps, sorry. Passing file URIs between apps, so outside your app's process, is now deprecated. And this has been my pet peeve for a long time. So you might know this as users of Android. When you try to share an image from one app to another, in many cases, it just doesn't work. Sharing on Android has been broken for many apps for a long time. And even though it wasn't broken in the system, our guidance was always the same, don't use file URIs, many apps were still doing it. And that's why finally in N, this situation will hopefully be resolved. You will just not be able to pass file URIs outside your app. And what you should do instead, you should always create a content URI. For example, using the file provider that's in the support library. There's a great training article on developer.android.com that you can read about that topic. It's not that difficult. You give it a file URI, you get a content URI, you share that in an intent outside your app, and then the other app has to remember to just use the content resolver to open this content URI. The underlying reason for it is that the private data over your apps, the private folders, will not be accessible to any other apps because of file permissions. So you just won't be, they just wouldn't be able to use file URIs anyway. And make sure if you have any kind of sharing of data between apps, make sure you use this new mechanism. This mechanism that was in Android for a long time. Just make sure you don't use file URIs anymore. Going on still about optimizing the usage of resources and making the lives of users better, there's this new thing that I mentioned before, Data Saver. So this is both a user-facing feature and the developer API again. A user can enable this Data Saver if they're I don't know, if they're roaming, if they want to save data, if they don't have a big data plan. And this is a global setting or a pair app setting. But what it means to developers, is whenever your app is under this data saver mode, it just doesn't have access to network when it's in the background. Just no connecting to any kind of servers for syncing, for anything. Be sure to use this API to check if you have access. The thing is, it's not that easy. An app can be whitelisted, and there's several things we would love developers to do with that info. So we would like you to check if your app is whitelisted. And if it is, you have access to internet. But what would be really nice for the user is if you could reduce the amount of data that you use anyway. So if the user enabled data saver, that means they want to save data. So maybe your app, even though it can access the internet, maybe you should download smaller images or pre-cache less data, download less info from your servers. So please check out the Data Saver API, and if every app does that, then there's potential for great savings for users. One more thing from new developer APIs, scoped folder access or scoped directory access. So historically, there's been a lot of confusion about accessing external memory on Android. There's been quite a few APIs during the previous Android versions, and with the new runtime permission model, it gets even more difficult, where you have to ask the user to access external storage and so on and so on. And developers were asking us for, a simple, I want to do a simple thing. I just want to save photos to the user photo drive, or I just want to access the user's music. I don't want to have access to all their private data because I'm afraid the user will not give me the permission, but I just need that one thing. So finally with N, we introduced this scoped folder access, where you can, similar to how runtime permissions work, you can ask the user to give you unlimited access to one certain area of the external storage. So for example, photos. We're hoping it'll make users more happy about giving access to your apps, and you will be able to, ask for less instead of ask for everything. And there's quite a lot of changes under the hood. There's a couple new more things. So again, something developers have been asking for a long time. There's some Java 8 language features coming to Android. We finally have lambdas, which work all the way down to, and I forgot which version. Anyway, lambdas are backwards compatible, so you can use them probably from Gingerbread, although sorry that I forgot which version exactly. You can also use default and static methods, but that works only on N. And also repeatable annotations. So to have all that, you will have to use the new toolchain. You will have to use Android Studio 2.1 with the new compiler Jack. I encourage you to test your apps again, but not everything will work. But that's where you can come in and give me feedback afterwards of why you cannot use it yet. There's some new APIs for dealing with localized text and text conversions and so on. So there's a full ICU implementation in Android for the first time as a public API. There's key store attestation. This is mostly useful for apps that are made for like banking, for securing transactions and so on, which actually lets you check if the keys stored on the device are valid and do the check on your server. So this is pretty powerful if you want to be absolutely sure that your data is not compromised. There's a declarative security config, so now you can make sure also that your app is not sending any plain text data or not using any broken invalid certificates just by declaring them in the Android manifest. And finally, we're moving again to a JIT compiler, which means just-in-time compiler for art. So if you're not familiar with the situation, in Dalvik before Android 5.0, Dalvik was the runtime for Android, and it had this just-in-time compiler, which means when you run your app, it gets optimized as it runs, and it can run faster. In Android 5.0 with Art, we introduced an ahead-of-time compiler. So app installation took a longer time, but the app was compiled to native code so that it can run faster as soon as you run it. And now we're moving back to a JIT, which will make app installations faster, so yay for users and developers. And it should be as fast as ahead-of-time compilation. There's not really any changes you have to make to your apps, but it's just for you to be aware of what's happening under the hood. And there's also a new APK signature scheme for the first time. So ever since Android 1.0, the APK signing worked the same. Now we're introducing a new one, which will again make app installation a lot faster, an order of magnitude faster. So for example, apps that could take maybe 3 or 5 seconds just to verify the signature, this can now go down to like 300 milliseconds. So it's pretty nice. You need the new Android Studio to use it, and it's of course only used on N. But don't worry, you can have both signing schemes in your APK, so older Androids can verify it, and it'll be a lot faster on N. And sorry for this laundry list of new APIs, but there was a lot of stuff. I'm right on time, I think, so I couldn't cover any more. But if you have any questions, I will be hanging out here at the conference today. There will be a Q&A session later. If you have any concerns about your apps not working with any of the new changes, any of the new breaking behaviors and so on, please find me and let me know, and I'm curious to hear your feedback. So thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.